So if you build your life on belief, you will always feel threatened by other beliefs. In other words, as you understand at the lowest level, you can understand at the greatest level. Spirituality always trumps belief. Hi, this is Mark from the Wayback Group. So in this podcast, we're going to be exploring faith, and watch till the end because there's some really, really useful exercises that we're going to do, and we're also going to look at how we can actually, in a way that increases the positive outcomes in our life and strengthens us spiritually, kind of explore that and how we can grow in our faith, and also how we can help other people to understand what faith is. Let me introduce myself, because if you're new to this podcast, it might help just to give you a little bit of background. I was born in 1974 and I started meditating at the age of 7. By 1997-98, roundabout then, I discovered much more advanced forms of meditation, and by 2009 I attained a state of consciousness that a lot of people classically refer to as enlightenment. Though I do appreciate that when it comes to terms like that, and as you'll discover a lot of terms, you really need to dig down a bit to understand deeper what people mean. So in some of my other videos I've talked a lot more about what that means, and I'll provide links. And throughout this podcast, whether you're listening or viewing, in the description I'll put lots of links to anything that I mention. What I'm fundamentally interested in talking about is spirituality. And whenever you talk about spirituality, words like enlightenment, meditation, these things will come up. And I'm always keen to kind of say, look, it's useful to define these things, because one meaning of the word meditation, for example, if you speak to someone from a religious context, then they will refer to meditation as a way of inner reflecting or contemplation on a particular topic. Whereas if you speak to someone who's come down a much more kind of practical spiritual route, then they may see meditation as sitting in stillness, letting go of the identity of self and going into what they would call higher states of consciousness. So I think it's always really wise to try and understand a little bit more of the meaning behind the words, especially when you're talking to someone on something as important as spirituality. So throughout this podcast video, if I bring up terms that maybe you're unfamiliar with, then it's worth going back to some of the articles and videos and podcasts that came before, because the chances are I've already covered a lot of the definitions in them. But I'll try and make it that you can understand this as we go forwards, even if you haven't seen or heard any of the work that's come before. So fundamentally, I'm a spiritual person, and for many, many years now, I've been sharing what I've learned on the inside from a spiritual perspective via books, via films, podcasts, and the like. And what I wanted to explore is the topic of faith. Now, the moment you say faith, straight away, most people will think, well, this is very much a religious term. And that's why I kind of really started by saying we need to define our terms. What we're talking about here is from a spiritual perspective. So I'm not saying according to any belief system, religion, or dogma. I'm talking about something that ultimately is directly related to you, your experience, irrespective of your beliefs, and fundamentally is something that you can experience from yourself through your own experiences. I kind of draw that disclaimer and say, look, although some of the terms may be more familiar to you from a religious perspective, what we're talking about here is spiritual. That's the kind of the beauty of words, and that's also, if you like, the downfall of words. Ancient philosophical teachings talk about naming is the beginning of all limits, or naming is the origin of all things. And what this means is the moment you define a word, that word alludes to something, but it isn't that thing. Understanding the difference between, say, words and belief and spirituality, true spirituality is being something. So if we're talking about, say, for example, stillness, I can say the word stillness, and that will evoke within you a certain understanding, normally based upon your own experiences up to that point of what you've experienced stillness to be. But the understanding triggered by the word is not the same thing as being still or being stillness. And so the goal is always to strive towards beingness rather than understandingness. You know, if I say to you spiritual faith or faith, like with any other word, that's evoked an idea within you. But I wonder how many of us have ever really contemplated, how do we break down what faith is? And if faith has value, how can we have more of it in a practical way? Is it something that just organically grows, or is it something that we can foster and engender within ourselves? Just take a moment just to kind of actually search within yourself, if you like. What does faith mean to you? Now, I think a good starting point here is to say, well, look, before we talk about what faith is, let's talk about what faith isn't. By the way, what I'm talking about here, or what I'm sharing with you, is from deep spiritual practice and insight. In other words, bringing into words concepts and experiences and states of awareness that are beyond where you would normally be using words. This is the irony. To help us all to go more into the spiritual ways of beingness, we have to start with words. So I'm trying to bring down these concepts and put them into words. And that's why it's really useful, I think, and beneficial to attempt the task of defining things like what is faith. From the understanding, if you like, is where we are right now in this kind of conversational two-way thing, but it's also where we are and how we communicate within ourselves. So if we mature our understanding, it doesn't make us more spiritual, but it then acts as a springboard from which we can move into a more spiritual, experiential existence. I would say, from what I've experienced, this is the caveat, and the challenge, if you like, is back me up, find out from your own experience, or grow upon what I'm presenting. In other words, take it and go further than it. So faith, especially talking about spirituality, is not belief. And that might surprise people, because a lot of people would say, well, hang on, isn't belief the foundation or the bedrock of faith? And the other thing that faith is not, it's not being positive. So let me qualify what I'm saying here, because having belief can be a very useful thing, and certainly being positive is extremely important, especially in a spiritual context. But these things are themselves not faith. So belief is if you like, your beliefs are the justification for your actions. So for example, if you believe that doing something or going somewhere will have a positive outcome, then you are motivated to do that thing or go to that place, whether that's a geographic place or a place on the inside. So belief, if you like, is the motivating justification for an endeavor, an aspiration. But the belief itself is not the faith. But there certainly is a correlation in that it's unlikely that you would have, for example, faith in something greater, were it not for you also at least having a belief that there is something greater. Here's why it's important to understand, and I've touched on this in previous podcasts, belief itself is shaky ground, because belief is what you have in the absence of knowledge. In other words, if you haven't directly experienced something for yourself, you will have belief. I've said this before, belief will get you started, but the goal of being spiritual is to experience what you believe, so that it's no longer just a belief, it's something that you know and can never be taken from you. So if I'm talking about a profound inner stillness, you can believe that it's there, and that will motivate you to go into states or practices of meditation where you can then access it. But until you've accessed it, all you've got is belief. Once you've accessed it, you transition from believing, which is shaky ground because beliefs can be changed, altered, they can be let go of, to absolute knowing or gnosis, which means that you have a direct experience of that inner stillness. And when you become more spiritual, then you are learning how to be more consistently those greater states of stillness or love or whatever it is that you aspire towards, through being them routinely and creating, if you like, more of an awareness of what has always been there. But you can believe it's there and never move towards it. So belief is a motivating principle, but it's shaky ground. So if you build your life on belief, you will always feel threatened by other beliefs. When you have direct experience of something, it can never be taken from you, and there is much more comfort, security, certainty, and solidity in that way of being, which is why spirituality always trumps belief, dogma, and therefore even religion. Religion is ultimately a belief. So the other thing is positivity, and again, absolutely vital to be positive. But understand what positivity is and why it's not actually faith. So positivity is best described as a state. And if you think about anything, so for example, if you've got a test, whether it's a driving test, an exam, some kind of work development thing. In other words, there's some challenge that you've got to face, and if you pass this thing, then it's a positive outcome for you. So in other words, you're motivated, you want to do this, and the outcome is positive. But therefore, if you don't succeed, then the outcome is less positive. So you're motivated for a positive outcome. Now, if you imagine that scenario and then you're going into that situation negative, oh, I'm going to fail, oh, it's too hard, oh, I can't do this. All those negative thoughts, that negativity will put you in a certain state. Now, if you contrast that with going into that situation in a positive state, in other words, I've got this, be calm, I've done the work, let's stay in a nice, focused, present, capable frame of mind, then which of those two do you think you're going to have the better outcome? It's always going to be positive, and there's lots of studies as well that show that in terms of, say, health factors and quality of life, a positive attitude you can have is highly advantageous. You can put two people in the same situation, and one will fall apart and one will thrive. And the reason is that the one that goes in with positivity thrives, and the one that goes in with negativity struggles. So I think that's well understood. So the take home there is positivity is not itself faith. You can be positive about what you have faith in, but positivity is the state that you have in approaching it. So I'm not saying don't be positive, I'm just saying understand that that isn't actually faith. Let's talk about what faith is. So faith is trust, hope, and acceptance. That's fundamentally it. But these are profound and actually very deep. If you were to take trust, put hope in, and have acceptance, then together they form your faith. Again, these are just, I'm kind of throwing more words into the mix, and you could kind of go, well, hang on a sec. How can I understand this? Perhaps you've heard the posit, as above, so below. What this alludes to is that we can understand the macrocosm, the greatest concepts, in the mundane, in the smallest things. In other words, if we look at something in our everyday life where we demonstrate some level of faith, where we have some level of trust, hope, and acceptance, then we can take that and extrapolate it to something that is almost beyond our comprehension. So as above, so below can be reversed to be as below, so above. In other words, as you understand at the lowest level, you can understand at the greatest level. So let's look at an example where we would have faith. And I'm going to go for something completely mundane that hopefully we can all relate to. So let's look at the idea of you're going to make a cake. If I've got to make a cake, let's just say I am enthusiastic in the kitchen. Am I experienced? Not particularly, especially not when it comes to baking, but say I want to bake a cake for someone's birthday, and I'd rather do it myself because I think that there's something really loving and sincere in saying, look, I baked this for you, rather than I just went to the shop and bought it. So here's a scenario. You want to bake a cake for someone that you care about, and therefore what you're hoping is that it will be pleasing to the other person and bring them joy. So where would I go? I would find a recipe. To mind comes, for example, Mary Berry. Is that her name? Mary Berry? The cake lady. So, because I know that she's a baker and she does things. So I would get her cookbook, recipe book. And the reason why I would go to her, why? Because she's got a reputation that has demonstrated an efficacy in this thing, making cakes. So there's an element of trust. So there we go. So we trust her to be able to advise me on how to make a cake because she's been doing it a lot longer. She's published all these books. She's published all these TV appearances of making cakes and other things. So she's demonstrated an aptitude and an ability in a positive way for the thing that I'm interested in. So my trust in her is on her reputation fundamentally. I get her book and I find the cake I want to make and I look at the recipe and I go shopping and I buy all the ingredients and I get everything ready and I do the work. And as I'm doing the work, my hope is that if I follow her instructions, because I trust her instructions, in other words, it's the recipe I'm trusting, and I trust the ingredients because I've gone to the shop and I bought fresh ingredients, so I trust everything's in date, and then I put it all together and put it in the oven, then I trust that the oven, if it's supposed to be 180 or whatever, that dial is accurate, so I'm trusting that that particular oven manufacturer is capable at making their ovens. So there's a lot of trust. There's trust in the ingredients, there's trust in the recipe, there's trust in the engineering of the oven. So at all stages, there's an element of trust. Why? Because that brand of oven has a reputation, or that oven hasn't let me down. This recipe, thousands of people have bought this book and it's got 5-star reviews. So trust is important throughout the process. My hope is that the oven will work, the ingredients are good, the recipe is good, and I've done a good job. And then I put it in the oven. And when I shut that door and set the timer, at that point, I'm handing it over. So I have to accept now. I've done all I can. It's down to the oven now. It's down to the quality of the ingredients. It's down to the instructions. But there's no more that I can do. So at that point, I'm demonstrating acceptance. Now, there's one more step in this process. When the timer goes and I take the cake out and I turn it over, or however I get it out, and I put it on the drying tray, or whatever the process is, at the end of the process, there is an outcome, there is a result. In this case, because we're looking at something every day, then the result is the cake. So however the cake comes out, I also have to accept. So acceptance has two parts to it. There's the acceptance as I put the cake into the oven, and there's the acceptance when I take the cake out at the end of the process. And so when you look at acceptance, there's the moment of letting go, putting the cake into the oven, is about neutrality. In other words, I have to let go. There's no more that I can do, and chefs and bakers will tell you, you can't, if you keep opening the oven to check, you're actually going to spoil the cake. So at some point you have to sit on your trust, accept you've done all you can, and just leave it for the amount of time in there. So acceptance is the neutrality of letting go. And the second part is when the cake comes out, however it comes out, acceptance means gratitude, in other words, and here's the cake, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to the recipe, the provider of the ingredients, the oven, my time, myself, the environment that supported me in doing this. So acceptance can actually be in the moment, the neutrality to let go, and the gratitude at the end of the process, that even if the cake didn't turn out how I wanted, I've learned from this experience, I've grown from this experience, I've gone in with the best of intentions, I've done all I can, and I can rest knowing that I've done all I can, and I am now grateful that however it turned out is okay. It might not taste as good, it might have flopped, there might have been a problem, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to move forwards, and I'm going to take gratitude as a stance. Now that's the gold standard, that's what we're aiming for. So in other words, if I had faith throughout, remember faith is the trust, the hope and the acceptance, then I also have faith irrespective of the outcome. And that is the gratitude at the end that says, well, here it is, and I am grateful. Now we've looked at it as an example of, something mundane like making a cake. So now we can apply that to the greatest perspective, because as above, so below, as below, so above. So let's look at the above. So we're talking about spirituality here. And ultimately, spirituality is the pursuit of becoming closer to God. Now, right at the start, I said we're not talking about religion, so I've just kind of dropped the G word, God. You could refer to it in, people do refer to it in many different ways. So this is, for example, the source of everything, the source, God, that which is one thing everywhere, that which cannot be defined. Whatever it means to you is what is important, because remember, I said at the start that spirituality is not about belief, it is about what you've experienced, what you know to be true from your own experience. So if we just use the word God, because it's a word that pretty much everyone is familiar with the caveat that I'm not talking about some guy with a beard on a cloud with a trident or anything like that. I'm talking about the absolute, beyond definition, God, one thing everywhere, the source. If that is the highest above, beyond limits, beyond time, beyond definition, then the highest faith is faith in God, or faith in the source. And that's the definition that we're talking about when we say spiritual faith. So taking this idea of the cake and now applying it to that. When people talk about faith, it's normally in times of trouble. People don't tend to think about what's beyond this life or what's greater than this life or behind it when everything's going well, when they've got everything going for them great in life. Happy people don't tend to become that spiritually aware. It doesn't mean you have to be unhappy, but they're distracted by the joys of life, and therefore they don't look up because they're too busy enjoying what's out. And there's no criticism in that, but it's useful to recognize, are you in that trap spiritually of being entertained and distracted by life? But I digress. So going back to the point, when people tend to reflect on faith, or someone will tell them, well, you just need to have faith, is normally because there's a real difficulty in life, like a sickness or a bereavement or a change of situation. So it's normally when people are actually struggling in life that the issue of faith will come up. And this highlights something really, really important that is kind of implied but needs to be put into words. And that is that faith is always to something beyond you. So in the trivial example of baking a cake, my faith was in, for example, Mary Berry and her recipe book and her experience, which is beyond my experience. In other words, I recognized her experience, her knowledge in the matter was greater than my own. So I was having faith that she knew what she was doing, and that would guide me in what I was doing. When we take it to the highest principle, faith in the source is faith that the source is greater than you, that the source knows more than you, that the source is more capable than you, that the source is more powerful than you, etc. So when people talk about faith, especially in relation to a situation that's difficult, there's ultimately an implied idea or suggestion that the source has the resources, the knowledge, the wisdom, the compassion, the love, the kindness, etc., to be able to help in that situation. And that's why when people are in difficulty, well-meaning friends or guides will tell them, you need to have some faith. What they're saying is, there is something bigger beyond you that can actually help. And what they're actually therefore hinting at is that it is through faith that you can receive that help. Your trust in this biggest picture, in this as above, so below, so as above picture, is trust in the source. Hope that the source can help you. Acceptance, which means letting go to the source. So there's a quite a famous saying, let go and let God. So that was the neutrality side of acceptance. And then the other side is gratitude. So whatever the outcome is, being grateful. And this is really important actually, because if you think about a situation that's really terrible, that hopefully none of us would ever face, for example, losing someone you love, whether it be a young child or a partner or a parent or, a close friend, you might not understand why. You might have prayed for their for their safety or their salvation or their healing. You may have done all you can in life to help them and to prevent this terrible outcome. And yet they have been taken from you. And that's why people quite often talk about situations where their faith is challenged or they feel their faith is rocked or broken. It's because, and it's not their fault, but without a deeper understanding, if they had trust and hope, but not neutrality, then they had a load of expectations like, I will only have trust and hope if I get the outcome that I wanted. Gratitude is basically the counter to that. So neutrality will say, I have done all I can, I have prayed, or I have done everything within my power to help this person, but it's now out of my hands. I'm not in control. And with that would come the wisdom and the spiritual wisdom to say, maybe there are things that I don't understand about this situation. Maybe the greatest kindness is that this person passes, and so I have to have trust that the source, God, knows best. Hope, I'm hoping for the best outcome for this person. I believe that means that they recover or get better, but it might actually be that they pass because they're suffering. So the neutrality is that acceptance to actually not try and own or dictate the outcome. And then when there is an outcome, having gratitude so that you're still basically accepting. And it's not foolish. It's massively empowering, because the gratitude is the opposite bookend, if you like, to trust. So you've got trust and gratitude, and they lean against each other. Okay, you take one away, it falls apart. In fact, there is no faith without acceptance, hope, and trust. You need all of them. If one of them is missing, then the whole thing falls over. It's like a three-legged stool. In order for it to stand firm, you need all three. And so if you look at that scenario where it is a great loss, down here, faith is what carries you forwards that means you don't have to understand. You don't have to justify. You don't have to explain. You're not ultimately responsible. You've done all you can. You had positive hopes. You trusted. The outcome wasn't what you expected, but you have gratitude because you also have the humility, and I talk a lot about humility in another podcast and how powerful that is. But you have the humility to say, you're not the source. How can you know the bigger picture? How can you understand where the greatest compassion was, or the greatest love, or the greatest demonstration of kindness was? So the gratitude frees you from that burden of having to be angry, having to be blameful, having to question yourself. You know you did all you could, let go. And so that's why acceptance is so, so important. Now, I touched on something. I said, for example, maybe you've prayed for that person to have a positive outcome. When investigating and looking into and exploring faith, one of the things that actually surprised me was the fact that if you have faith, you do not need to pray. You'd think, well, if I don't ask, if I don't pray to the source, pray to God to have the positive outcome, then how do they know what I want? In other words, praying is a bit like saying, well, I'm picking up the phone and ordering something. You know, please help this person to get better. Please help me to heal, whatever it is. If you have faith, then remember that between trust and acceptance is hope. And hope, there is another word for what hope is. Hope is desire. Hope is, for example, with the cake, I want the cake to taste nice and look nice because it's a gift for someone and I want to bring joy into their life. So the hope is a directional thing. It gives you direction. My direction is to bring joy to this other person. And the way I believe that will happen is by giving them this homemade cake. I know it's trivial, but we can extrapolate that up. When praying for someone, it's because you have a hope that they would get better, a good outcome for them. And that's kind of key as well, that when it comes to faith, it's all in the positive. There's no negative. So if you are intending something negative, there is no faith. That's not how it works. So hope is the desire for a positive outcome, whether it's for yourself or someone else or for people generally, or the world. If you have trust in the source and you have acceptance, which means you're kind of letting go, you're not trying to dictate how things should be done. Then if you also have hope, the hope is it's like a perpetual prayer. It's there saying, this is the positive outcome I would like. And that greatest, we'll call it God, the source, one thing everywhere, resonates to that. It detects it, if you like. It knows it. It tunes into it. It is drawn to it because, and we'll touch on this a little bit more, but at the core of a desire is a thought. And before anything comes thought. So if you have a positive thought, then that positive desire for a positive outcome is a positive thought. Let's just say it resonates at a very high frequency. That means it is known to that which is the greatest good. That's a simple way of putting it. It's like an embedded prayer. You don't have to then go through the action of praying because you're holding that faith, that desire, that hope within the center of faith is there like a beacon saying, this is the outcome I want. Faith isn't a passive thing. Faith is actually a very dynamic thing. It has direction, and the direction is driven by your positive desire. Now, obviously, people kind of like, I want a Ferrari. I don't, but people come up with stuff like, I want a Ferrari. I want to win the lottery. I want lots of money. I want fame. I want fortune, or whatever it is. None of that's positive. They may think that it will make their lives better, but that's not good. It's materialistic, it's ego, it's all of these things. So, you know, when I'm talking about a positive outcome, I do mean genuinely stuff to do with the heart, not to do with the wallet or the head. So, you know, kind of keep that in mind, that we're talking about spiritually positive, driven by the heart, driven by the soul, the spirit, those kind of core positive good values that make humans so amazing. You might have to, when thinking about examples or applying this in your life, a little bit of soul searching, no pun intended, but literally searching your soul for what is the truth of the desire. Is it actually material? Is it actually ego? Is it actually status? Is it seeking power? Because all of those things are really actually negative. Or is it genuinely compassionate, loving, caring, nurturing, those things which are positive. You don't have to pray in order to have faith and demonstrate faith. The desire part of it is the motive force that gets things moving. So let me just recap what we've looked at so far. Trust. We've got hope, and that can also be known as desire. And then we've got acceptance, and acceptance can be understood as in the moment, neutrality, and with the outcome, with the result, then gratitude. So these words are really, really important, and they help us understand, put them all together, what faith really is, spiritual faith. So I'd like to invite you to do a little exercise. Obviously, if you're driving or you're distracted by other things at the moment, now might not be the right time. You can come back to this, or if you can, pull over, stop, whatever. Just for a few minutes, we're going to do a little exercise. But I want you to just start to relax. This isn't meditation, so we're not closing our eyes and going off. But if you want to close your eyes, but please stay present. So listen to my voice. Just take a few deep breaths. Just relaxing, becoming more present in the moment, because it's really important, actually. Being present is what starts to wake us up rather than just being distracted. So be present in the moment. Earlier I talked about how people refer to things, the greatest, as God or the source. Forget about the labels. Whatever that is, I want you to really just tune in. What does God or the source or the great one thing everywhere, what does that mean to you? You'd have some kind of sense of it. So just allow yourself to bathe in it, to be surrounded by it, to know it. So not focusing on self, but focusing outwards on it. If you want to pause and just go into that a bit more, please do. Now I want you to notice the contrast. I want you to notice yourself. So whether that's smaller, whether that's more located, whatever it is for you. And now notice the relationship between the two. So how do you relate to the source? And just notice that dynamic. So now there's you, there's this source, the one thing everywhere, and there's a relationship between you. This may be the first time you've ever considered this. Or maybe it's something that you're familiar with. But it doesn't matter if this is the second time, or if you've come back and watched this video again, or listened to this podcast again. Right now is the first time that it is right now. Because being spiritual is not an idea, it's not a concept, it's not information, it's not something you did yesterday, it's always what's happening right now. Okay, so tune into the right nowness of what we're doing. And relax even more. Now I'm going to read out some words, and from the state that you are now, which is hopefully more relaxed, stiller, more present, be aware of how much you have of this thing in relation to the source. Notice if there's resistance, notice if it's not really there, or if there's lots of it. But in a very neutral, accepting, compassionate, no judgment sort of way. So this is just for right now. Relax. Hope. Neutrality. Trust. Gratitude. Acceptance. Positive desire. So hopefully you notice which ones resonated, which ones maybe there was a bit of resistance, which ones were stronger, which ones were weaker, and you can always rewind and do this again, or come back to this another time. We'll come back to this. So let us consider, okay, so look, we're talking about faith, and in particular spiritual faith, which means your faith in that which is greater, that your faith in God or the source. But why is it important? In other words, why is faith in the source important? Well, even if you didn't have faith, you would still be alive, you would still function. In fact, there are a lot of people demonstrating this every single day. Some of them are having wonderful lives. Some of them are profoundly successful by material standards. Some of them are having terrible lives. So you can't say their quality of life is purely because of whether they have faith or not. There's a whole spectrum. So this isn't a judgmental thing saying, well, those who lack faith will be damned, or those that... No, we're not doing that. I just genuinely want to understand, well, what is the consequence of living a life without faith? Because if we want to understand the value of faith, then sometimes it's worth looking at what happens if it's not there. Earlier, when I was doing the work to kind of go inside and understand this in a much more profound and deeper way, then it's helpful just to write stuff down. But I wrote something down that kind of sums it up, really, because I wrote the question down because it came to me. So why do you need faith, brackets, in God or the source, etc.? If you don't have faith in God, then you are not a beneficiary of goodness. Let me put that another way then. Let's break this down. The word good actually comes from the word God. So all that is godly, the qualities of God, if you think about that great source, the cause of everything, then all that is good comes from it. So we're talking about love, compassion, healing, light, etc. So these are like, if you know, to keep things simple, these are the radiances or the brilliance of God. And we down here can potentially benefit from being loved or being healed, etc. People talk about praying for healing or wishing well, you know, blessings, etc. for others. So all that is good comes from God is maybe a phrase you've heard me say in some of my other podcasts, and I don't say it lightly. So God is the cause, or the source is the cause. The source, literally the clue is there, the source of all that is good. So earlier I alluded to this, and I said that hope is a positive thought fundamentally. Before there is anything, there has to be thought. And even down here that plays out. So if I was to, I don't know, design some contraption, I'd have to have the thought first, then I'd do the sketch. So that's the kind of primary manifestation of it, or I'd write down some words. And then I'd go to my workshop and I'd chop wood and drill holes and manifest, bring into reality the product of that thought. And from having the thought, I'd invest energy to get it done. So thought is the start of everything. And when you have that strong positive desire, as I said, the source knows it and responds with an outpouring of goodness. And goodness can be broken down, and you can talk about it in terms of healing or love or blessings or joy or any of the good things that you would want for someone that you love and care about, for example. So collectively, if we just think about that as good energy, but the good energy is the result of thought. Your desire received evokes the sending of good energy to support you in attaining this positive outcome. And that's massively profound. And people talk a lot about, just a slight detour here, but I think it's really relevant. So people talk a lot about, oh yeah, so have a strong desire and have a thought clear about what you want and visualize it, get into that groove, positivity, and manifest. And so that we can talk about the secret, the laws of attraction, the laws of manifestation, the teachings of Abraham. But there's something missing from that narrative, and I've got an entire podcast where I talk about how even if the intentions are good, that whole side of things can be a massive spiritual dead end and can actually be quite harmful. And the obvious reason is because if all that is good comes from God, but you're not including God in the narrative, then where do you think what you're manifesting is coming from, and what is the cost or the price that you're paying on a spiritual level to doing that kind of work? So if you like, faith doesn't necessitate you trying to dictate and control what you manifest, because remember, it's got acceptance in it, and neutrality is a part of that, which means I don't know how this is going to play out. That's not my job. There's a humility there to say, look, I don't have all the answers, but I have sent my desire through faith to the source, and I am accepting of what comes back. That's a completely different attitude to, I want this, therefore I am going to, with the power of my mind or whatever visualization, manifest this thing and Therefore, I know better than God what's going on. If you want to kind of explore that, then there'll be a link, because there is a real kind of almost dark side to the laws of attraction and the laws of manifesting and all of that side of things. But that was a slight detour. So getting it back on track, what we're talking about here. All that is good comes from God. All the good energies, all the supportive things, literally the grace to bring about within your environment what it is that might help you in your situation. And it might not be what you expect or want, but that's where the gratitude comes in and the neutrality. So with faith, then there is that request from desire, positive desire and hope, that is answered through the, let's just say, the good energies that come from the source of goodness. So I've literally written here, God, arrow, thoughts, arrow, energy, brackets, goodness, healing, etc. So it's literally like that. So if you're looking for a health outcome, like you've been diagnosed with something and you're looking for a positive outcome there, then that healing, assuming that you're a fundamentally good person and that there's no negativity within that would either cause the dis-ease to be a case of feedback. And again, I'll put a link to, there's a whole discussion about why sometimes we create our own disease to help us learn and grow. But if it's not that, and it's actually that genuinely it would be right and good that you are healed, then then that healing can come through. But if you basically, the corollary of all of this is if you don't have faith in God, then you have, by your choice, because remember, we all have free will, you have by your choice effectively denied yourself the goodness that comes from God, because you have to evoke it through faith, through trust, hope and acceptance. And so if there isn't trust in God or the source, or hope or acceptance, then you cannot be a beneficiary of those things. And it's not because you are being punished by God, it's you're punishing yourself by removing God from the equation. You could be going, yeah, but what about people that don't know about God? What about people that aren't religious? I think you'd really struggle on this planet to find anyone that hasn't at least heard of the concept of God in some way, shape or form. Where even in the most remote places, there's going to be some concept of that which is greater, the creator, whatever. I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about spiritual truth. So remember, whatever I'm talking about is here to be understood, but the goal is not understanding, the goal is transcending understanding, to stand on the shoulders of understanding and to reach direct personal experience. And it's from that direct personal experience that I'm trying to bring this down into words, sharing that experience, if you like, to help us all. This isn't just for you, this is for me, because there's a real benefit to the process of having these profound experiences on the inside and then trying to articulate them hopefully in a way that can help other people, because it helps me, because it crystallizes my own understanding. Remember, if you are sitting in a profound state of stillness, having an experience of the goodness of God, if you like, the radiance of God or whatever, then in that moment, you're not in your brain understanding, making notes. You're in the experience being, letting go of the limits of self, being the great space that contains everything, etc. It's only afterwards that you can retrospectively bring it down and go, okay, I want to understand this for my own personal development down here. In other words, the development of the person as opposed to the development of the state. So I've had the state, let's bring it down. And then, I don't know, as a kindness, to try and make the world a better place, I don't know. There's many reasons why I do this work, but it's fundamentally, everything we do is not for profit. As much as possible is freely given. So it's not for any negative gain, it's for the positive gain of trying to improve the world we live in through sharing what is hopefully a positive message. That sounds to me like there's some real benefits to having faith. And if you think about it, life will go on. Whether people have faith or not, they can still have positive outcomes, but it will be what they can draw from their own environment based on their own experience, their own wisdom. Faith is always to something greater, and obviously spiritual faith, the greatest faith would be faith in God, faith in the source. So you can say, well, I don't have any faith in that, and there's a lot of people that declare that. They say they're atheists, or they don't believe, or it's all a load of nonsense. But what they will be able to do in life will only be supported either by their own endeavours. And you can literally strip this down to, okay, so they won't receive love, they won't receive healing, they won't receive blessings, they won't receive anything. So if they've rejected God, they could just be neutral. They could just be exercising their free will, but not in a malicious way. Or they could actually just be a bad person, in which case they will attract the other kind of energies that aren't good, the bad ones. So they may actually gain in power or worldly status or all of these things because, and again, I've talked about this in a number of other videos and podcasts, but there are, within duality, if you like, just as if you go, if you walk down into town, you'll meet some really nice people. You may also meet some people that would rob you if given a chance. So there's some bad people. And throughout duality, on all kind of dimensions, there's good and bad. All that is good comes from God, but we live within duality. And keeping things really simple, if you've said, well, I don't believe in God and I reject that and I don't have any faith in God, that doesn't mean you're bad. But some people are bad, and therefore they may be rejecting God because they have a level of darkness within themselves. And so they may well be deriving some gain in these lower physical realms, if you like, in the physical life that they're living, because they're drawing in that darkness. And that, in the short term, may give them a sense of power, which is ultimately narcissism and ego. But they're still fundamentally working within limits. And they're not tapping into that, which is fundamentally the source of all that is good. And so at the end of the day, where they may have short-term gains, in the long term, they're missing out. And remember, this life is one of many that you, as a spiritual being, a being with a soul and a spirit, will have. And so, the more spiritual we are, we're not looking just at this life, we're looking at the bigger picture, that this is one of many lives, and the purpose here is to learn and to grow spiritually. And so if you listen to what really between the lines of what's being said, if the absence of faith is rejecting God in your life, then having faith and wanting to have faith is actually bringing God into your life, bringing the source in, and becoming therefore more spiritual. And so working on faith is actually another way of working on increasing your spirituality. And I've done lots of articles and videos talking about a kind of a deep, profound understanding of what spirituality is. And so that's another reason why faith actually really, really matters. It's another facet of your spiritual growth and development. And so because faith is clearly very important as a spiritual human being wanting to grow spiritually, then the obvious question is, well, how can I be more faithful? How can I have more faith? And the answer is really, really simple. So we did that exercise earlier for a reason. I want you now to reflect back on it. And was there any of the words? So we had trust, hope, acceptance, and acceptance was broken down. So we also had neutrality and gratitude, and we also had desire. So were any of those words weaker, or there was resistance, or you didn't feel comfortable about them? Say, for example, you struggled with the word gratitude, then work on gratitude. And that simply means, without being too much up here, but much more coming from the heart, okay, I realise that maybe I could be more grateful. And not just to God, or the source, but I'm going to, as below, so above, as above, so below, I'm going to practice gratitude in all aspects of my life. Or perhaps it's hope. I realise I'm lacking in hope. So I'm now going to practice having hope. For example, I've done a video, as I said, I've done a video on humility. Well, if you haven't got any, or if you're struggling with humility, start by pretending, which I know sounds crazy, but if you have the thought, okay, well, I'm going to be humble, and this may be a bit clunky, and I may be a bit in my head on this, but I'm going to intend for the next hour that everything that I hear or see or talk to people or whatever, I'm going to try and be humble. And it will be awkward, and I'll probably trip up and I'll probably get it wrong. But that's okay, because my intention is to try it on. And then eventually, actually, no, you know what? I'm actually becoming more humble. That's how it works. So whichever one of those things, and you can, again, rewind it, do the exercise again, or do it tomorrow, listen again. But whichever one you struggled with, that's the one to focus on. And if you didn't struggle with any, but you still want to grow, because trust me, we can all always grow, then just choose one. Write them down in a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then roll a dice. Whichever number comes up for that day, focus on practicing that particular quality or approach. So whether it's trust, right? Well, because for example, with trust, someone says, do you trust God? Yeah. But how often do you think about it? How often do you make what is in the back come to the forefront in your awareness? If you say, okay, for the next day, I'm going to be consciously aware of my trust in God. I'm going to make it almost like an affirmation. So I trust God, or I have hope, or I am accepting. Really, really simple, but there's real power in that. So it's through really just intention, positive affirmation, a bit of self-reflection that we can grow in our faith. So there's a couple of questions that naturally might come up. One of them is, look, so can you have faith just in the source, or can you have faith in anything? And I think it's really important, therefore, to differentiate. So when I was talking about making a cake, I was demonstrating faith in the recipe, faith in the oven's, the build quality of the oven, faith in the quality of the ingredients. That's kind of mundane faith. And so from that point of view, yeah, you can have faith that your dentist will do a good job. You can apply this process to all kinds of aspects of life. And that's why I say spiritual faith. So when I say spiritual faith, what I'm referring to is the greatest faith. So rather than faith within duality, faith within everyday life, I'm talking about the faith that is the greatest faith. And from that perspective, you can really only have faith in God, spiritually speaking. So spiritual faith means faith in God, not faith in a guide or an angel or some beings on some dimension, or, if you looked at the law of manifesting, then not faith in Abraham or whatever that collective is, because that's not the greatest. So spiritual faith is always faith in God, faith in the source. And that raises another question. Remember, this is not religion, even though some of the words I use might be more familiar to you from a religious context. So another question that might come up is, well, look, can you have faith in Jesus? Now, I've already talked to some extent about Jesus in some of our other podcasts. And yeah, Jesus definitely exists. Note present tense, and I've referred to him as the greatest spiritual teacher ever, the greatest human, and Jesus is God. So can you have faith in Jesus? Well, if I say have faith in God, that implies, because Jesus is God, that you have faith in Jesus that is God. But when people talk about Jesus, what they're normally referring to is Jesus, the person that walked the earth. And from that perspective, if you said, well, look, I don't have faith in God, but I do have faith in Jesus, that wouldn't actually be spiritual faith, and that wouldn't bring forth goodness, because that would be akin to saying something along the lines of, I have faith in the Son, but not his Father. Okay, and if you think, well, that's like saying, well, I know the Son is good because he is God, but I don't like his dad. So why should the gifts or the treasures of the Father be bestowed upon you if you've rejected the Father but accepted his Son? And so you can't have faith in Jesus as the ultimate spiritual faith. You have to have faith in God, and therefore, because God is one thing everywhere and Jesus is God, and I know this gets a bit confusing, but trying to keep it simple in terms of Jesus is God that took on form or became human so that we could know of God in a more honest and truthful way, keeping it really simple. Then, and Jesus, when his time was done down here, carried on being God and is still Jesus. So I guess this is where we have to have a little bit of faith. We're not meant to understand everything. Look at going back to the notes. So do we have trust in that which is greatest? And therefore, if that which is greatest is the cause of all that is good, including Jesus, then trust, that there is a purpose and that this all makes sense in the biggest picture. So do we have trust? Do we have hope? Do we have acceptance? Which means we don't have to understand. As an aside, remember, so what I'm doing here is I'm taking stuff that's massively beyond the realms of the brain or the mind or anything like that. and fundamentally is truth. And I've talked about, if you seek the truth, you seek God, whether you realise it or not. Ultimately, the pursuit of truth to the highest order will always reveal the presence of God. And so the good news is that whenever there is truth, it resonates, even if there isn't understanding. So you don't need to understand something to go, look, I get it. There's something truthful about this. And, the guy I'm listening to in this video isn't necessarily the most capable person of explaining it, but there is truth behind what is being said. And again, the purpose of spirituality is to pursue that truth, not to pursue the understanding of the words that are pointing in the direction of the truth, but to pursue that truth. And the greatest truth is God. And therefore, we don't need to understand perfectly. We just need to respond and discern when there is some truth in what is being said, and then not get hung up on the words, but take it further. So to answer the kind of went off piste a little bit there again, but to answer the question that has been asked about, is it enough to have faith in Jesus? No, you actually have to. The spiritual faith has to be to the greatest. Because you could say, well, okay, so what about, Jesus inspired these people and they inspired this book, and can I have faith in that book? Well, no, because, if Jesus was the first hand, then the book is second or third order. It doesn't mean there's not truth in it. And that's the point. Just as this video, this podcast is words trying to capture something greater and convey it to you in a positive way. So it's not to say throw the baby out with the bathwater and that book isn't any good, but it's kind of saying, where should your spiritual faith be placed? And ultimately, it is that which is greatest. Again, look, I always want to try and bring things down to a way that we can understand them, because ultimately this is a question of, so what is spiritual faith? And we've talked about what it is and how we can grow in it and refined our understanding of it through examples. But if that's still all too far beyond you, or maybe beyond someone that you would like to help, a good way of explaining faith is in the relationship. So we talked about Jesus and God. So in the relationship of a parent-child. Caveat here, I'm talking about good, healthy relationship. So there's always going to be outliers, and total compassion to people who've maybe had a bad experience in their relationship, parent-child relationship, and maybe with time there'll be healing there. But I'm talking about the archetypal, healthy, loving, nurturing relationship between a parent and a child. Then that child never has to stop when they're young. They don't go, will my parent, I'm saying parent, mother, father, will they provide for me? Will they give me a hug? Will they love me? Will they forgive me? In other words, all the goodness that child, without even articulating it, understands should come from the parent. And that's why if it isn't there, if there's a broken relationship, then it's quite damaging. But all that goodness that a parent would, without question, give towards their child, the child has faith that their parent will provide. And the child didn't have to articulate that. The child didn't have to sit down and reason. Now, the beauty of what we're doing here is that we're advancing and deepening our understanding, and therefore we can deepen our relationship to God, to the source, to one thing everywhere. If people are going, I don't even understand, even after all this, I don't get what faith is, say, well, does a child need to question that their parent would be there for them? And the answer is no. The child has that unshakable faith. The child trusts. The child hopes that if they bang their knee, that mum's going to rub it and make it better, or dad's going to rub it and make it better. That if their parents say something in a kind and compassionate way, it might not be what the child wanted, but there's an implied acceptance that the parent knows best, because this parent loves them so much, demonstrates that love for them, and therefore the child doesn't always get its way. And so in that kind of child-parent relationship is another way of understanding in the microcosm that relationship of faith. So hopefully you found this really, really useful. There's going to be links below. Please share, like it, but most importantly, just share it with people that would actually benefit from it. And I thank you for giving your time, sharing in this journey. Wherever you are, lots of love to you. God bless.